And now the valley rests again, but this rest feels temporary, not uneasy, not restless, temporary. What has unfolded tonight has brought everything closer to its edge, not the edge of chaos, the edge of completion. If you are still awake, notice the steadiness in the silence. The uncertainty that once lingered has almost disappeared. What remains is direction. The wilderness no longer watches, it prepares, and in the next part, preparation becomes action. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty that has guided this story from the beginning. The final movement draws near. The last unanswered space is narrowing. And when silence narrows, truth has nowhere left to hide. But not tonight. Tonight, you release that tension. Let it drift like mist over dark water. There is nothing we must anticipate, nothing we must predict. The valley will finish what it has begun. When you are ready to return, Part 9 will be waiting, and the quiet certainty will become something even deeper. For now, breathe slowly. Let your body grow heavy. Let the wilderness fade into dream. Sleep peacefully, and I will meet you again, where silence prepares to become final. He drew a hand across his eyes, as if to clear his vision. What he had seen was impossible. Assaulted, in deadly peril, defending either honor or love, Mareth Radisson was of the blood to kill, but to creep up behind her victim. It was inconceivable, yet there had been no struggle. Even the automatic on the floor gave no evidence of that. Kent picked it up. He looked at it closely, and again the unconscious cry of despair came in a half-groan from his lips. For on the butt of the Colt was a stain of blood and a few grey hairs. Kedsty had been stunned by a blow from his own gun. As Kent placed it on the table, his eyes caught suddenly a gleam of steel under the edge of a newspaper, and he drew out from their hiding place the long-bladed clipping scissors which Kedsty had used in the preparation of his scrapbooks and official reports. It was the last link in the deadly evidence, the automatic with its telltale stain, the scissors, the tress of hair, and Mareth Radisson. He felt a sensation of sudden dizziness. Every nerve center in his body had received its shock. When the shock had passed, it left him sweating. Swiftly, the reaction came. It was a lie, he told himself. The evidence was false. Mareth could not have committed that crime. A crime had visualized itself before his eyes. There was something which he had not seen, something which he could not see, something that was hiding itself from him. He became, in an instant, the old James Kent. The instinctive processes of the manhunter leaped to their stations like trained soldiers. He saw Mareth again, as she had looked at him when he entered the room. It was not murder he had caught in her wide-open eyes. It was not hatred. It was not madness. It was a quivering, bleeding soul crying out to him in agony that no other human eyes had ever revealed to him before. And suddenly a great voice cried out in his brain, drowning all other things, telling him how contemptible a thing was love, unless in that love was faith. With his heart choking him, he turned against it. The futility of the thing which he had told himself was faith gripped at him sickeningly, yet he fought for that faith. even as his eyes looked again upon the ghastly torture that was in Kedsty's face. He was becoming calmer. He touched the dead man's cheek and found that it was no longer warm. The tragedy must have occurred an hour before. He examined more closely the abrasion on Kedsty's forehead. It was not a deep wound, and the blow that had made it must have stunned the inspector of police for only a short time. In that space, the other thing had happened. In spite of his almost superhuman effort to keep the picture away from him, Kent saw it vividly. The swift turning to the table, the inspiration of the scissors, the clipping of the long tress of hair, the choking to death of Kedsty as he regained consciousness. Over and over again he whispered to himself the impossibility of it, the absurdity of it, the utter incongruity of it. Only a brain gone mad would have conceived that monstrous way of killing Kedsty. And Marette was not mad, she was sane. Like the eyes of a hunting ferret, his own eyes swept quickly about the room. At the 4 windows there were long curtain cords. On the walls hung there as trophies were a number of weapons. On one end of Kedsty's desk, used as a paperweight, was a stone tomahawk. Still nearer to the dead man's hands, and hidden by papers, was a bootlace. Under his limp right hand was the automatic. With these possible instruments of death close at hand, ready to be snatched up without trouble or waste of time, why had the murderer used a tress of woman's hair? The bootlace drew Kent's eyes. It was impossible not to see it, 48 inches long and 1/4-inch wide buckskin. He began seeking for its mate, and found it on the floor where Marette Radisson had been standing. And again, the unanswerable question pounded in Kent's brain. Why had Kedsty's murderer used a tress of hair instead of a buckskin lace or one of the curtain cords hanging conspicuously at the windows? He went to each of these windows and found them locked. Then, a last time, he bent over Kedsty. He knew that in the final moments of his life, Kedsty had suffered a slow and torturing agony. His twisted face left the story, and the inspector of police was a powerful man. He had struggled, still partly dazed by the blow. But it had taken strength to overcome him even then, to hold his head back, to choke life out of him slowly with the noose of hair. And Kent, now that the significance of what he saw began to grow upon him more clearly, felt triumphing over all other things in his soul, a slow and mighty joy. It was inconceivable that with the strength of her own hands and body, Marette Radisson had killed Kedsty. Her greater strength than hers had held him in the death chair, and a greater strength than hers had choked life from the inspector of police. He drew slowly out of the room, closing the door noiselessly behind him. He found that the front door was as Kedsty had left it, unlocked. Close to that door he stood for a space, scarcely allowing himself to breathe. He listened, but no sound came down the dimly illumined stairway. New thing was pressing upon him now. It rode over the shock of tragedy, over the first roused instincts of the manhunter, overwhelming him with the realization of a horror such as had never confronted him before. It gripped him more fiercely than the mere killing of Kedsty. His thought was of Marette, of the fate which dawn and discovery would bring for her. His hands clenched and his jaws tightened. The world was against him, and tomorrow it would be against her. Only he, in the face of all that condemning evidence in the room beyond, would disbelieve her guilty of Kedsty's death. And he, Jim Kent, was already a murderer in the eyes of the law. He felt within him the slow-growing inspiration of a new spirit, the gathering might of a new force. A few hours ago, he was an outcast. He was condemned. Life for him had been robbed of its last hope, and in that hour of his grimmest despair, Marette Radisson had come to him. Through storm that had rocked the earth under her feet and set ablaze the chaotic blackness of the sky over her head, she had struggled for him. She had counted no cost. She had measured no chances. She had simply come because she believed in him. And now, upstairs, she was the victim of the terrible price that was the first cost of his freedom. For he believed, now that the thought came to him like a dagger stroke, that this was so. Her act in freeing him had brought about the final climax, and as a result of it, Kedsty was dead. He went to the foot of the stair. Quietly, in his shoeless feet, he began to climb them. He wanted to cry out Marette's name, even before he came to the top. He wanted to reach up to her with his arms outstretched, but he came silently to her door and looked in. She lay in a crumpled, huddled heap on her bed. Her face was hidden, and all about her lay her smothering hair. For a moment he was frightened. He could not see that she was breathing. So still was she, that she was like one dead. His footsteps were unheard as he moved across the room. He knelt down beside her, reached out his arms, and gathered her into them. "Marette," he cried in a low voice. He felt a sudden quiver, like a little shock that ran through her. He crushed his face down so that it lay in her hair, still damp from its wetting. He drew her closer, tightening his arms about her slender body, and a little cry came from her, a cry that was a broken thing, a sob without tears. "Marette." It was all he said. It was all he could say in that moment. His heart was beating like a drum against her breast, and then he felt the slow pressure of her hands against him, saw her white face, her wide, staring eyes, within a few inches of his own, and she drew away from him, back against the wall, still huddled like a child on the bed, with her eyes fixed on him in a way that frightened him. There were no tears in them. She had not been crying, but her face was as white as he had seen it down in Kedsty's room. Some of the horror and shock had gone out of it. In it was another look as her eyes glowed upon Kent. It was a look of incredulity, of disbelief, a thing slowly fading away under the miracle of an amazing revelation. The truth thrust itself upon him. Marette had not expected that he would come to her like this. She had believed that he would take flight into the night, escaping from her as he would have run from a plague. She put up her two hands, in the trick they had of groping at her white throat, and her lips formed a word which she did not speak. Kent, to his own amazement, was smiling and still on his knees. He pulled himself to his feet and stood up straight, looking down at her in that same strange, comforting, all-powerful way. The thrill of it was passing into her veins. A flush of color was driving the deathly pallor from her face. Her lips were parted, and she breathed quickly, a little excitedly. "I thought you would go," she said. "Not without you," he said. "I have come to take you with me." He drew out his watch. "How soon can you be ready, Marette?" He was fighting to make his voice quiet and unexcited. It was a terrific struggle, and Marette was not blind to it. She drew herself from the bed and stood up before him. Her two hands still clasped at her throbbing throat. "You believe that I killed Kedsty," she said, in a voice that was forced from her lips. "And you'd come to help me, to pay me for what I tried to do for you. That is it, James, pay you," he cried. "I could not pay you in a million years. From that day you first came to Cardigan's place, you gave me life. You came when the last spark of hope in me had died. I shall always believe that I would have died that night, but you saved me. From the moment I saw you, I loved you, and I believe it was that love that kept me alive. And then you came to me again, down there, through this storm. Pay you, I cannot. I never shall be able to. Because you thought I had killed a man made no difference. You came just the same, and you came ready to kill if necessary, for me. I am not trying to tell myself why, but you did. You were ready to kill, and I am ready to kill tonight for you. I have not got time to think about Kedsty. I am thinking about you." "If you killed him, I am just telling myself there was a mighty good reason for it. But I do not believe it was you who killed him. You could not do it with those hands." He reached out suddenly and seized them, slipping his grip to her wrists so that her hands lay upward in his own, hands that were small, slim-fingered, soft-palmed, beautiful. They could not. He cried, almost fiercely. "I swear to God, it could not." Her eyes and face flamed at his words. "You believe that, James?" "Yes, just as you believe that I did not kill John Barclay. But the world is against us. It is against us both now, and we have got to hunt that hidden valley of yours together. Understand, Marette? And I am rather glad." He turned toward the door. "Will you be ready in 10 minutes?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." "Yes." Then he returned to his hiding place under the roof. He knew that a strange sort of madness was in his blood, for in the face of tonight's tragedy, only madness could inspire him with the ecstatic thrill that was in his veins. Kedsty's death seemed far removed from a more important thing, the fact that from this hour Marette was his to fight for, that she belonged to him, that she must go with him. He left her, in spite of whoever she was and whatever she had done. He loved her. Very soon she would tell him what had happened in the room below, and the thing would be clear. There was one little corner of his brain that fought him. It kept telling him like a parrot that it was a tress of Marette's hair about Kedsty's throat, and that it was the hair that had choked him. But Marette would explain that too. He was sure of it. In the face of the facts below, he was illogical and unreasonable. He knew it. But his love for this girl who had come strangely and tragically into his life, was like an intoxicant, and his faith was illimitable. She did not kill Kedsty. Another part of his brain kept repeating it over and over, even as he recalled that only a few hours before she had told him quite calmly that she would kill the inspector of police. His hands worked as swiftly as his thoughts. He laced up his service boots. All the food and dishes on the table he made into a compact bundle and placed in the shoulder pack. He carried this and a rifle out into the hall. Then he returned to Marette's room. The door was closed. At his knock, the girl's voice told him that she was not quite ready. He waited. He could hear her moving about quickly in her room. An interval of silence followed. Another 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. He tapped at the door again. This time it was opened. He stared, amazed at the change in Marette. She had stepped back from the door to let him enter, and stood full in the lamp glow. Her slim, beautiful body was dressed in a velvety blue corduroy. The coat was close-fitting and boyish. The skirt came only a little below her knees. On her feet were high-topped caribou boots. About her waist was a holster and a little black gun. Her hair was done up and crowded under a close-fitting turban. She was exquisitely lovely as she stood there waiting for him, and in that loveliness Kent saw there was not one thing out of place. The corduroy, the turban, the short skirt, and the high-laced boots were made for the wilderness. She was not a tenderfoot. She was a little sourdough, clear through. Gladness leaped into Kent's face. But it was not the transformation of her dress alone that amazed him. She was changed in another way. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes glowed with a strange and wonderful radiance. As she looked at him, her lips were red, as he had seen them that first time at Cardigan's place. Her pallor, her fear, her horror were gone, and in their place was the repressed excitement of one about to enter upon a strange adventure. On the floor was a pack, only half as large as Kent's, and when he picked it up, he found it of almost no weight. He fastened it to his own pack, while Marette put on her raincoat and went down the stair ahead of him. In the hall below she was waiting when he came down with Ketsty's big rubber slicker in her hands. "You must put it on," she said. She shuddered slightly as she held the garment. The color was almost gone from her cheeks as she faced the door beyond which the dead man sat in his chair, but the marvelous glow was still in her eyes as she helped Kent with his pack and the slicker, and afterward stood for an instant with her hands touching his breast and her lips as if about to speak something which she held back. A few steps beyond them they heard the storm. It seemed to rush upon the bungalow in a new fury, beating at the door, crashing over their heads in thunder, tearing them to come out. Kent reached up and turned out the hall light. In darkness he opened the door. Rain and wind swept in. With his free hand he groped out, found Marette, drew her after him, and closed the door again. Entering from the lighted hall into the storm was like being swallowed in a pit of blackness. It engulfed and smothered them. Then came suddenly a flash of lightning, and he saw Mamet's face, white and wrenched, but looking at him with that same strange glow in her eyes. It thrilled him. Even in the darkness, it was there. It had been there since he had returned to her from Ketsti and had knelt at her bedside, with his arms about her for a moment. Only now, in the beat of the storm, did an answer to the miracle of it come to him. It was because of him. It was because of his faith in her. Even death and horror could not keep it from her eyes. He wanted to cry out the joy of his discovery, to give wild voice to it in the teeth of the wind and the rain. He felt sweeping through him a force mightier than that of the night. Her hands were on his arm, as if she was afraid of losing him in that pit of blackness. The soft cling of them was like a contact, through which came a warm thrill of electrical life. He put out his arm and drew her to him, so that for a moment his face pressed against the top of her wet little turban, and then he heard her say, "There is a scow at the Bayou-Jims. It is close to the end of the path. Seu Fingers has kept it there, waiting, ready. He'd been thinking of Crossen's place and an open boat." He blessed Fingers again as he took Marette's hand in his own and started for the trail that led through the poplar thicket. Their feet slopped deep in wet and mud, and with the rain there was a wind that took their breath away. It was impossible to see a tree an arm's length away, and Kent hoped that the lightning would come frequently enough to guide him. In the first flare of it, he looked down the slope that led riverward. Little rivulets of water were running down it. Rocks and stumps were in their way, and underfoot it was slippery. Marette's fingers were clinging to his again, as she had held to them on the wild race up to Ketsti's bungalow from the barracks. He had tingled then in the sheer joy of their thrill, but it was a different thrill that stirred him now, an overwhelming emotion of possessorship. This night, with its storm and its blackness, was the most wonderful of all his nights. He sensed nothing of its discomfort. It could not beat back the joyous racing of the blood in his body. Sun and stars, day and night, sunshine and cloud were trivial and inconsequential to him now. For close to him, struggling with him, fighting through the night with him, trusting him, helpless without him, was the living, breathing thing he loved more than he loved his own life. For many years, without knowing it, he had waited for this night, and now that it was upon him, it inundated and swept away his old life. He was no longer the huntsman, the hunted. He was no longer alone, but had a priceless thing to fight for, a priceless and helpless thing that was clinging to his fingers in the darkness. He did not feel like a fugitive, but as one who has come into a great triumph. He sensed no uncertainty or doubt. The river lay ahead, and for him the river had become the soul, and the promise of life. It was Marette's river and his river, and in a little while they would be on it. And Marette would then tell him about Ketsti. He was sure of that. She would tell him what had happened while he slept. His faith was illimitable. They came into the sudden dip at the foot of the ridge, and the lightning revealed to him the edge of the poplar growth in which O'Connor had seen Marette many weeks ago. The bayou trail wound through this. and Kent struck out for it blindly in the darkness. He did not try to talk, but he freed his companion's hand and put his arm about her when they came to the level ground, so that she was sheltered by him from the beat of the storm. Then brush swished in their faces, and they stopped, waiting for the lightning again. Kent was not anxious for it to come. He drew the girl still closer, and in that pit of blackness, with the deluge about her and the crash of thunder over her head, she snuggled up against his breast, the throb of her body against him, waiting, watching, with him. Her frailty, the helplessness of her, the slimness of her, in the crook of his arm, filled him with an exquisite exultation. He did not think of her now as the splendid, fearless creature who had leveled her little black gun at the 3 men in barracks. She was no longer the mysterious, defiant, unafraid person who had held him in a sort of awe that first hour in Kedsty's place, for she was crumpled against him now, utterly dependent and afraid. In that chaos of storm, something told him that her nerve was broken, that without him she would be lost, and would cry out in fear, and he was glad. He held her tighter. He bent his head until his face touched the wet, crushed hair under the edge of her turban. And then the lightning split open the night again, and he saw the way ahead of him to the trail. Even in darkness, it was not difficult to follow in the clean-cut wagon path. Over their heads, the tops of the poplars swished and wailed. Under their feet, the roadway in places was a running stream or inundated until it became a pool. In pitch blackness, they struck such a pool, and in spite of the handicap of his packs and rifle, Kent stopped suddenly and picked Marette up in his arms and carried her until they reached high ground. He did not ask permission, and Marette, for a minute or two, lay crumpled up close in his arms, and for a thrilling instant his face touched her rain-wet cheek. The miracle of their adventure was that neither spoke. To Kent, the silence between them had become a thing which he had no desire to break. In that silence, excused and abetted by the tumult of the storm, he felt that a wonderful something was drawing them closer and closer together, and that words might spoil the indescribable magic of the thing that was happening. When he set Marette on her feet again, her hand accidentally fell upon his, and for a moment her fingers closed upon it in a soft pressure that meant more to him than 1,000 words of gratitude. A quarter of a mile beyond the poplar thicket, they came to the edge of the spruce and cedar timber, and soon the thick walls of the forest shut them in, sheltering them from the wind. But the blackness was even more like that of a bottomless pit. Kent had noticed that the thunder and lightning were drifting steadily eastward, and now the occasional flashes of electrical fire scarcely illumined the trail ahead of them. The rain was not beating so fiercely. They could hear the wail of the spruce and cedar tops, and the slush of their boots in mud and water. An interval came where the spruce tops met overhead, when it was almost calm. It was then that Kent threw out of him a great, deep breath and laughed joyously and exultantly. "Are you wet, little grey goose?" "Only outside, big otter. My feathers have kept me dry." Her voice had a trembling, half-sobbing, half-rejoicing note in it. It was not the voice of one who had recently killed a man. In it were the pathos, which Kent knew she was trying to hide behind brave words. Her hands clung to the arm of his rubber slicker, even as they stood there, close together, as if she was afraid something might drag them apart in that treacherous gloom. Kent, fumbling for a moment, drew from an inner pocket a dry handkerchief. Then he found her face, tilted it a bit upward, and wiped it dry. He might have done the same thing to a child who had been crying. After that, he scrubbed his own, and they went on, its arm about her again. It was 1/2 a mile from the edge of the forest to the bayou, and 1/2 a dozen times in that distance, Kent took the girl in his arms and carried her through water that almost reached his boot tops. The lightning no longer served them. The rain still fell steadily, but the wind had gone with the eastward sweep of the storm, close hung with the forest walls. The Bayasisef was indiscernible in the blackness. Maret guided him now, though Kent walked ahead of her, holding firmly to her hand. Unless fingers had changed its location, the scow should be somewhere within 40 or 50 paces of the end of the trail. It was small, a two-man scow, with a tight little house built amidships, and it was a black, and it was tied close up against the shore. Then he stumbled against something taut and knee-high, found it was the tie rope. Leaving Maret with her back to the anchor tree, he went to board. The water was 3-4 inches deep in the bottom of the scow, but the cabin was built on a platform raised above the floor of the boat, and Kent hoped it was still dry. He groped until he found the twisted wire which held the door shut. Opening it, he ducked his head low and entered. The little room was not more than 4 feet high, and for greater convenience, he fell upon his knees while fumbling under his slicker for his waterproof box of matches. The water had not yet risen above the floor. The first light he struck revealed the interior to him. It was a tiny cabin, scarcely larger than some boxes he had seen. It was about 8 feet long by 6 in width, and the ceiling was so low that even kneeling his head touched it. His match burned out, and he lighted another. This time he saw a candle stuck in a bit of split birch that projected from the wall. He crept to it and lighted it. For a moment he looked about him, and again he blessed fingers. The little scow was prepared for a voyage. 2 narrow bunks were built at the far end, one so close above the other that Kent grinned as he thought of squeezing between. There were blankets. Within reach of his arm was a tiny stove, and close to the stove a supply of kindling and dry wood. The whole thing made him think of child's playhouse. Yet there was still room for a wide, comfortable cane-bottomed chair, a stool, and a smooth planed board fastened under a window so that it answered the purpose of a table. This table was piled with many packages. He stripped off his packs and returned for Maret. She had come to the edge of the scow and called to him softly as she heard him splashing through the water. Her arms were reaching toward him to meet him. In the darkness, he carried her through the shallow sea about his feet and laughed as he put her down on the edge of the platform at the door. It was a low, joyous laugh. The yellow light of the candle sputtered in their wet faces. Only dimly could he see her, but her eyes were shining. "Your nest, little grey goose," he cried gently. Her hand reached up and touched his face. "You have been good to me, James," she said. a little tremble in her voice. "You may kiss me." Out in the beat of the rain, Kent's heart choked him with song. His soul swelled with the desire to shout forth a paean of joy and triumph at the world he was leaving this night for all time. With the warm thrill of Marette's lips, he had become the Superman, and as he leaped ashore in the darkness and cut the T-rope with a single slash of his knife, he wanted to give voice to the thing that was in him, as the rivermen had chanted in the glory of their freedom the day the big brigade started north. And he 999 sing under his laughing, sobbing breath. With a giant's strength, he sent the scow out into the bayou, and then back and forth. He swung the long one-man sweep, twisting the craft riverward with the force of 2 pairs of arms instead of 1. Behind the closed door of the tiny cabin, all that the world now held worth fighting for. By turning his head, he could see the faint illumination of the candle at the window. The light, the cabin, Marette. He laughed inanely, foolishly, like a boy. He began to hear a dull, droning murmur, a sound that with each stroke of the sweep grew into a more distinct, cataract-like roar. It was the river, swollen by flood. It was a terrifying sound, but Kent did not dread it. It was his river. It was his friend. It was the pulse and throb of life to him. Now, the growing tumult of it was not menace, but the joyous thunder of many voices calling to him, rejoicing at his coming. It grew in his ears. Over his head, the black sky opened again, and a deluge of rain fell straight down. But above the sound of it, the rush of the river drew nearer, and still nearer. He felt the first eddying swirl of it against the scow head, and powerful hands seemed to reach in, out of the darkness. He knew that the nose of the current had caught him and was carrying him out on the breast of the stream. He shipped the sweep and straightened himself, facing the utter chaos of blackness ahead. He felt under him the slow and mighty pulse of the great flood as it swept toward the Slave, the Mackenzie, and the Arctic. And he cried out at last in the downpour storm, a cry of joy, of exultation, of hope that reached beyond the laws of men. And then he turned toward the little cabin, where through the thickness of sodden night, the tiny window was glowing yellow with candlelight. Tonight, the valley feels still in a different way, not waiting, not watching, settled through every quiet moment that brought us here, through every slow choice made in silence. The wilderness has been guiding the path, and now that path becomes clear. You have journeyed through the earlier parts. You may feel it. There is no more hesitation left in the air, no more uncertainty drifting between the trees, only direction. Welcome back to the Three Rivers country. If this is your first time here, you have arrived where silence carries its final meaning. You do not need to know every step that led here. Just listen, because the valley does not rush its conclusions. Before we continue, take one slow breath in and let it fall away gently, Let your thoughts loosen. Let your body sink deeper into calm. There is nothing for you to prepare, nothing to anticipate, only the steady rhythm of what must now unfold. In Part 9, the quiet strength that has shaped this journey moves forward without resistance, and when the wilderness moves with certainty, it does not turn back. Allow the words to carry you. Allow sleep to come whenever it chooses. Now, we return to the Valley of Silent Men.